independent. I mean, I've read this book probably 3 times now. I mean, once just because I'm speaking now and I have to read it. But every time I read it, it's a different context, and every context makes you think. And I think the very important thing that you make, the very important point that you make in your book that I find important, things that you directly express, things that linger there in the book, and I think narrative is very crucial to what your book brings. And you said that it's constantly our narrative and our story is created by internationals, and a narrative cannot be constructed, otherwise it's not narrative, it's just information. And narratives, we pass the narrative from generation to generation through our practice, through our struggle, and the narrative is there. It's in our practice, and we practice it, and it gives us a sense and it gives us direction. And by clearly trying to express that narrative, understand that narrative, and express it in your practice, it also empowers that sense of direction, and also brings together causes and brings together solidarity. And you coming from a context also of struggle, that was important. So the same way also the narrative is there in our practice. It's not something that you construct, it's also you've taken it to your practice, and you ask yourself the most important question: what the Palestinian narrative means to my practice, to what I do daily, to how I live my life. And that's very important. You're not just dealing with the Palestinian narrative that you've been exposed to in a very artificial way, and that has reflected in your understanding in transition justice. And I think that where your work and this particular book really is powerful in expressing. We can easily get sucked into information. People tend to, today we read a lot. It's all in the social media. You're 24 hours reading, and it keeps on stimulating us, and we lose a very, very important thing that I think you did not lose, knowing you very well, knowing you through the process of thinking about this book and writing the book, and how you produced it, which is having this slow, long, lingering gaze, thinking, listening, not just seeking the information constantly. That long gaze was very important to the process, I think, and it's a strategy of the enemy to flood us in information and make us over-explain ourselves, over-explain our story. We should explain why killing 10 people is a crime, why killing 5 is a crime, why killing 100 is a crime, and as you hear them today, they're worried that there are too many civilian deaths. 200, 300 is acceptable, but 500, not too many. It's just, so, and we got sucked into explaining ourselves too much. And speaking to you over the years when you were in Palestine, discussing all these things, you did not make me explain myself too much. You let me speak and narrate my story, and my story with Balami also as a Palestinian, and you listened, and that was something that I saw in your writings. We've had long discussions on reparation, on what does it mean to me and as a Palestinian, does over-explanation, this flood of information, is not the narrative. It's something that is trying to make us lose that sense of direction, and I think that's why work like your work is important in that transition. It also does not reinvent the wheel. It does not just tell us the basics of the Palestinian struggle and adds more information and more information. It takes it a step forward, speaking about the next day. The next day for us is not the next day. The next day of us is the next day after liberation. And the next day is the next day that we are gonna create. And I like a particularly important sentence in your important phrase in your text in chapter 3, and I think chapter 3 is particularly important. It can be also taken to other practices, to other understanding in other fields, not only transitional justice. But one phrase in particular where you say revelation without cause to repair serves no useful purpose and runs the risk of allowing for a sense of closure. And that's what they constantly try to make us just feel that sense of closure and give up on past wounds. And that's not preparation for us. And unfortunately also, one thing I'll wrap up now with just that thing that I think that was important in your process, which is something you have not done, which many people and in solidarity do, which pisses me off deeply, is that they intrude on our grief. They try to tell us how to grieve. They try to, to sort of create also our grief and intrude into it. And there is a fine line between empathy and intrusion into our grief. That's no one's purpose on telling us how to grieve or to grieve and to cry and not to cry. We deal with it in the way that helps us stay strong for the struggle. And if we decide to not cry for 50,000 being killed today, it's not just because we don't have a sense of care to these lives. If one person dies, not a child, if one fighter dies, that's a big loss for us. And that's deeply woundful, but we decide when and how we grieve. And that's something also I think was important in the way that's lingering in the way that you're thinking of reparation. It's giving us that it's important that the agency in reparation and in grief is with us, not with anyone, even in solidarity, imposing on us. So I really recommend that you read this book, but also to think of it beyond what it says about transitional justice, but also to think about how language and narrative is being used and driving this kind of work, and think of how that also can reflect on different aspects of discussing Palestine, not only as basics. The basics, we all know the basics. Settlers came, they drove us out of our land, stole our land, and created a colonial state. These are not disputed facts. We don't need to keep on repeating them. No one should be convincing us to accept a 2-state, 3 states. And anyone who says that we need to forget about 48 and 448, they are the same people who tomorrow they're gonna tell us forget about Jabalia and north of Gaza Strip because the war happened, you lost, and let's look at the future. We decide the future and we reimagine the future, and I really recommend that you really read this book in these aspects. Thank you.